Welcome, everyone, back to Falcons Central Radio Show on the Pro Football Central Radio Network. I am one of your hosts, Aaron Freeman, founder of FalconsFans.com. We are back this week with my co-host, Scott Karasik, who covers things for Sportsnot, MMA, and the like. Maybe we'll get him to write some Falcon stuff in the near future. But we're back this week to talk about the Atlanta Falcons. They are opening up their season against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. We'll be previewing that game. We are finally back doing football, talking about real games that matter as opposed to preseason. I'm getting a little bit of an echo, Scott.
All right, yeah. I'll correct that. But yes, preseason, real games that matter, not preseason. Real games that matter, not sitting there and watching the draft again and going over the important things that actually do matter on this roster. Like, who's going to start?
Yep. So we'll talk about the final cuts. Sorry about that, guys. We'll be talking about the Falcons' final roster, the practice squad. We'll be talking about the new depth chart update that they released earlier today as we're recording this on Tuesday. And, we'll answer you guys' mailbag questions. We've got plenty this week, and a lot of them pertain to those subjects. So, Scott, let's jump right into the roster moves. The Falcons were able to reduce their roster to 53. There's the potential that there may be some other moves looming between now and Sunday. We'll talk a little bit about that a little later. But they cut a bunch of guys, made a couple of roster moves to get down from 75 players to 53. The players that they ended up cutting were Corey Washington, Colin Rehrig, Lawrence Gibson, Bryce Harris, Malachi Goodman, Corey Johnson, Matt Wells, Damian Barnes, and Shane Graham. They put 3 guys on IR. That was Tyler Starr, Akeem King, and DeMarcus Van Dyke. They came to injury settlements with 2 other guys, Brandon Wiles and Will Rattel, and they put 10 guys on their practice squad. They just added another guy today, so we'll talk about that. The 10 on the practice squad were Matt Sims, Gus Johnson, J.D. McKissick, Nick Williams, DJ Tagovailoa, Nordley Cappy. They substituted Joe Villano in for Joey Mbu today, Devontae Johnson, Deji Olatoye, and Sherrod Neesman round up the practice squad. And, of course, they signed Taylor Gabriel. I think all these moves, I think Gabriel's the biggest one, so we'll start talking about him first. We got a couple of mailbag questions that sort of guide us in how we'll approach the impact of Taylor Gabriel. Charlie Rogers asks, do you like Gabriel better than Williams? And your boy J94 asks, how big an impact will Taylor Gabriel have on the Falcons wide receiver core this year?
Do I like Gabriel better than Williams? Yes. Very, very much so. Very much so. I mean, Gabriel is just a really good all-around receiver. He can run all the underneath stuff that Williams was running. He can run all – he can catch the ball effectively. And he can burn a defense deep. He's basically, if you combined Williams and Aldrick Robinson together. Like, I think he's a better receiver than Aldrick Robinson.
Yeah, that's a pretty fair assessment. I remember last summer when people, or really 2 summers ago, when people were hyping up Bernard Reedy in terms of where his impact could be. The player I compared him to was Taylor Gabriel. Like, if Reedy became the player that people wanted him to become, he would essentially become Taylor Gabriel, which is a undersized guy, 5'8", I think, 5'8.5" maybe. But it has blazing speed. He got timed with a wind-aided 40 of 4.28, which you sort of adjust for the wind. That's about a 4.4 flat. So very fast, certainly has the speed to stretch vertically. That's how he was used in Kyle Shanahan's offense back in 2014 when Shanahan was the Browns' offensive coordinator. And I think that's exactly how the Falcons are going to use him. It's a promising sign. As Scott said, he's going to be used a lot like Aldrick Robinson, which is basically a field stretcher. Get him in some opportunities in play action. I guess there's probably going to be a little bit of a wait till we get to see him on the field. Even though he's not new to the offense, I don't think the Falcons are going to rush him out there early on. I think for at least these first couple of games, he's basically going to be stashed in order to sort of beat depth and sort of get up to speed practice-wise. But hopefully at some point, whether it's on special teams or offense, I think, maybe October, November, we'll get an opportunity to see him play. You got anything else to add about Gabriel Scott before we move on to talking a little bit about the practice squad?
The only other thing I remember about Taylor Gabriel is that I want to say they used him as a kick returner at one point. So it's very possible that the Falcons could look at him as a return specialist, even though I think he only has like 3 career returns on his record, 4 career returns. Just because that kind of speed back there on a kickoff and he knows what he's doing, I think he could do it.
Yeah, the first year he was in Cleveland in 2014 when he was an undrafted rookie, they used him during the preseason both as a kick and punt returner, and he did pretty well. I think he averaged like 32 yards per kickoff return, which for those of you that aren't in the know, that's very good. Average is like 23 yards, so he's like 10 yards above the average. Then last year they used Travis Benjamin as their main punt returner, and I don't think Gabriel really got any opportunities in the preseason or the regular season all that much. But then this year, with Benjamin going to San Diego and not Atlanta, Gabriel was the guy that was the front runner to get that punt return job. But apparently, even though I think he averaged like maybe 13, 14 yards per punt return this preseason, for whatever reason, the Browns decided to move on. And the Falcons are better for it. So I do think eventually we're going to see Gabriel back there on returns. My hope is, but I know the Falcons announced either today or yesterday that the plan moving forward is probably going to have Tevin Coleman returning kicks at least week 1 and Eric Williams returning punts week 1. So I don't think that's going to be a permanent move, but I think we'll eventually see Gabriel back there. So, Scott, let's move on to the practice squad. And obviously there is a little bit of a news today, as a few minutes before we recorded this, within an hour of us recording this, is that the Falcons added Joe Villano, the defensive tackle who used to play for the Patriots, to their practice squad. We just found out that from Von McClure over at ESPN that they did wind up cutting Joey and Boo to make space for Joe Villano. We do have a mailbag question about the practice squad specifically from Evan Birchfield. He says, of the players cut now on our practice squad, who, if any, do you think could eventually end up on the roster?
Nick Williams and J.D. McKissick are the 2 that I would say stand the bet should one of the receivers get injured. Anybody on the practice squad. I mean, when you look at this practice squad, it's basically an extension of the depth chart. If one of the pass rushers, if say Brooks Reed gets injured, I can see Nordley Cappy coming up and seeing playing time. I can see Sherrod Niesman coming up at safety if Robinson Teresi or Deshaun Goldson get hurt. I can see well, maybe not Deji Olatoy, but everybody else was there for training camp. I can see Matt Sims get called up if Ryan went down and they needed a backup for Shaw. Tia LaVea going up. If Toy Lolo goes down or one of the other tight ends goes down, they can bring Tia LaVea up. The only one that I'm questioning is Devontae Johnson. But as long as they make it through 4 weeks without an injury at cornerback, I see Jalen Collins taking that last spot.
Yeah, I mean, Scott said it. It really is basically who will get called up is really going to depend on somebody getting hurt. Any one of these guys could get called up to the roster spot, and they'll almost certainly be for an injury as opposed to because somebody else is underperforming. Maybe the cornerback situation where you could see maybe if Poole or Goodwin struggle this first month, maybe they bring up one of those guys just to add depth. The interesting thing about Olatoye is I asked a couple of Cowboys fans that I know, and they talked about him, and he was very impressive to them. And I know for a lot of Cowboy fans, a lot of Cowboy beat writers, they considered him a lock to make that team, because I know he was with them last year on the practice squad, and I think got some opportunities to play late in the season and looked pretty good. But he didn't really struggle in the last preseason game against the Texans, and he got picked on, and I guess that sort of he got picked on enough that sort of changed that narrative for him, and he wound up getting cut. So he is a guy that I think could be a good developmental option for us. As for Villano, I don't know enough about Villano to really make a judgment. I know he got some opportunities to play with the Patriots a couple years ago when Vince Wilfork got hurt. And from what I've read or seen, he did an adequate job. I'm a little disappointed that Joey Mbu didn't get a chance to stick, and maybe he'll get an opportunity further down the line. But I thought Mbu had a pretty good summer. He didn't get a ton of reps, but I thought he really made the most of those reps working with the second team defense and the base defense behind Greg Jarrett.
I think
and so I'm.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Scott.
I was going to say, I think Villano is more of that they want someone quicker. They're trying to move towards a quicker, more penetrating defensive line. And I guess outside of Tyson Jackson or Sheet Hageman, that's kind of the mold they've got with everybody. Claiborne's more of that penetrating kind of guy. He's not that bowl through you. Reed, Freeney, Babineau, Grady Jarrett, Upshaw, Shelby. I mean, almost the entire defensive line is built around the idea of penetrate, don't plow over them. So, penetrate with quickness as opposed to attack with power. So I think Villano kind of fits that a little better.
Yeah, we'll see how it works out. Hopefully we don't have to worry about any injuries at that spot so that we actually see Villano. So hopefully we won't have to find out whether he's good or not. And, that'll be something to deal with next summer in the preseason as opposed to this season. So, were there any surprises for you, Scott, or anybody that made the practice squad or did make the practice squad that you were a little surprised?
I guess for me, the only kind of surprise was that Perkins made the roster and wasn't on the practice squad. But I was predicting that for a little bit.
Yeah.
And I was just shocked that they actually did it because it just made too much sense. And then who was it that got cut that I wasn't expecting? Oh, yeah, Brandon Wilds with that injury settlement. That so they could bring him back eventually.
Yeah. And for folks that didn't know, they did change the rules with injury settlements. Instead of having to wait 6 weeks plus to bring guys back, I think it's now 3 weeks. So there's a decent chance that whether it's Wiles or Rattel or whoever, that they might be back on the practice squad in a month or so. So, keep an eye on that. Just quick touch on the injured reserve guys, the 3 guys that we put on the injured reserve with Starr, Akeem King, and DeMarcus Van Dyke. The rules are with the injured reserve with the sort of designated to return policy where you don't have to initially say that those guys are designated to return, but you could only do that with guys that got put on injured reserve like after Sunday as opposed to before. And that doesn't apply to Starr, King, or Van Dyke if I recall correctly. So all 3 of those guys are out for the season, presumably, unless the Falcons decide to reach an injury settlement with them between now and some point and decide to bring them back or whatever. But with those guys presumably out for the season, and if they're brought back next year, what are your sort of expectations? Or is this sort of a lost year? Is this going to be a out of sight, out of mind sort of situation for some of these guys? I know particularly Starr and King, the Falcons have a little bit more of a vested interest in seeing what those guys can do in the future. But do you feel like, Scott, that either one of those guys will still have an opportunity to sort of come back next year and earn a spot?
I didn't realize Starr was on the injured reserve.
Yeah, he got waived. He got waived injured. So once he clears waivers, which he did, he's on the IR.
mean, I think Starr and King and Van Dyke, they're all worthy of at least having on a camp roster. I thought King played pretty well as a fourth corner all throughout the preseason. I thought he was going to pick up the same role that he had earned by the end of last season against the Saints, where he was coming in and just guarding tight ends. I don't see why you wouldn't want to bring back King. Van Dyke, I mean, you bring him in just because it's nice to have that one veteran guy at the bottom of the roster for camp. You know, you don't expect guys like him to even come in and consider it, but he's been here a while. Let him be at the bottom of the roster, earn a spot.
Okay. Let's move on to some of the cuts. I know, Scott, you mentioned Brandon Wiles being a little bit of a surprise. At least for me, probably the one surprise for me among the cuts was seeing Toilolo make the team over Tia LaVea. I thought Tia LaVea had significantly outplayed Toilolo this summer and been a much more effective blocker. And, apparently the Falcons probably decided to go with Toilolo just because they want a little bit more upside as a pass catcher, even though they still don't ever use Toilolo as a pass catcher. So, that was one of the reasons why I thought Tia LaVea would wind up making it, because they don't use Toilolo to catch passes, and that skill set wouldn't matter all that much. But as you mentioned, Scott, they did decide to keep 4 tight ends with Josh Perkins as that 4th guy, Austin Hooper and Jacob Tamme, obviously, the other 2 guys. So that was the big surprise to me. They did end up bringing Tia LaVea back on the practice squad, so I guess that's a positive sign. But I was a little surprised to see both Perkins and Toilolo make it. I thought Toilolo would get cut, Tia LaVea would get that spot, and Perkins would wind up on the practice squad. So that was the one thing that sort of threw me for a curveball. Another area, I know there was a lot of areas of the roster that people were sort of debating back and forth who should make it. I know wide receiver was a big one, with sort of the debate surrounding Eric Weems and Nick Williams and J.D. McKissick. And obviously Weems was the one that wound up sticking. Another spot that I thought was a little debatable whether some certain guys would stick was that linebacker with Philip Wheeler and Leroy Reynolds. I thought both of those guys would stick. But I do think both of those guys were a little bit on the bubble if the Falcons were looking to sort of create a spot for somebody else. You have any thoughts on whether the tight end, linebacker, or the wide receiver positions, how that wound up stacking up?
I mean, I was shocked that they didn't just keep Williams and McKissick, because I kept watching the preseason and I was like, I don't know where Williams is even at. Like, where is Eric Williams? What is he doing? I even went back and watched it on the All 22, and I just could not find him unless it was a special teams play. So I guess they're just like, hey, this is our guaranteed special teamer. He's our key guy. He stays. And I don't like that, because I thought McKissick outplayed him. I thought Williams outplayed him. I thought they both outplayed him as a returner. I thought they both outplayed him as special teams players this preseason. I thought they both would have been worth it on the roster to keep. So I guess Aldrick Robinson and Weems are going to be the main gunners this year on the outside, because I don't see Gabriel as someone you want to put out there.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think, I thought it was interesting in that last preseason game with David Archer and the other guy, I forget his name. I apologize. They were calling the game and they were talking about the wide receiver depth. And they had listed that Weems was a lock to make it, and it was really boiling down to Williams versus McKissick. I thought that was interesting, just because Archer tends to have a little bit some of those insights occasionally on sort of the team's thinking. As for Weems' role, you're right. He didn't really I don't think he played a single snap on offense the last 2 preseason games. He did get some work in the first 2 games, if I can recall correctly. But his primary role is as a personal protector on punts, which is that guy who plays the up back spot in front of the punter, and basically is the last line of defense for preventing punts to get blocked. And the one thing you can certainly say about Eric Weems is that only 1 punt in his entire career has ever been blocked when he's played that role, and that's been his pretty consistent role both with the Bears and the Falcons for the last 5 or 6 years. And the issue with the Falcons, and I thought one of the reasons why the Falcons specifically targeted Cyrus Gray to sign to the roster was because he played that same role with Kansas City. But really, the only other player that really got reps there this summer was Sherrod Niesman. Last summer, I know they gave Ricardo Allen some snaps there as well. But it doesn't seem like the Falcons really have anybody available that immediately is going to fill that role and replace Weems. So I think that's one of the reasons why Weems wound up being safe. I know Hardy was one of the gunners last year. And by gunner, that's the guys who line up on the outside, like wide receivers on punts. I thought he was probably one of our better gunners. So I suspect he'll probably continue that role. I know Robinson and McKissick and several other receivers got opportunities to play that, but I think we'll probably see Hardy and Therizi and maybe Brian Poole playing those roles. That'll be something to keep an eye on. And Weems is Teflon, I guess, when it comes to I don't know if he's going to be back next year, but we'll get one more year of Eric Weems. I'm not going to.
Yeah, it is a contract year for him.
Yeah, he's one of my favorites, so I'm not going to complain about it. But yeah. Okay, let's talk a little bit about some of the other positions where the Falcons, we did sign Taylor Gabriel, but we did not address some of these other areas where you can question a little bit the depth. 3 areas that sort of stood out to me where you could certainly say that the Falcons could have potentially improved their roster by scouring the waiver wire is cornerback, because there's only 4 guys currently on the roster with Collins being suspended. Running back position, because the issues with Teron Ward, and his ankle injury and that sort of thing. And the center position. Now, interesting enough, there was a report earlier today that the Falcons worked out former St. Louis Rams center / guard, whatever, Derrick Jones. We did get a mailbag question about that from Leovani Lasada. He wanted us to talk about the center that we're working out for Bama. So, Scott, do you have any insights into Barrett Jones? And
I loved Barrett Jones when he was coming out of college. I thought he was a first-round caliber player. I mean, I missed hard on him, but I thought he was a hell of a football player. I thought he was a better center prospect than Jonathan Cooper was. I really liked what he did. I thought he commanded that line. He had size to him. He's not as good as what Ryan Kelly has turned into, but I don't think Barrett Jones I think his career went off track because of injury more than anything else. I'll put it that way. I have him rated higher than Travis Frederick.
Okay, interesting. I think you're probably right about the injury. I know he dealt with injuries those first couple of years he was in St. Louis. I actually was never a big fan of Barrett Jones. I thought he was a little overrated because he went to Alabama, and I think players tend to get overrated when they go to Alabama. And I thought he was okay. I thought he would be a decent to low-level NFL starter. I think his value was more his versatility to play multiple positions as opposed to being good at any particular one. I thought he was a decent guard, and then they moved in the left tackle, and then I think they moved in the center and whatnot. But I was never a huge fan of Barrett Jones. If the Falcons wind up signing him, I mean, that'll be interesting. I do think the center position is an area of need just because with Garland in person, we've seen Person's issues with snapping the ball. I think one of the more overlooked aspects of the preseason was Ben Garland also had equal struggles snapping the ball, a lot of high snaps, a lot of low snaps in shotgun. And so I do feel like if the Falcons are forced to put one of those guys in the game at center, if Alex Mack gets hurt, all those snapping issues, all those complaints that people had for last year's offensive line are going to come right back. So I think getting a center that can sort of do that, I do question a little bit if that's really Barrett Jones's strength. I don't know enough, but he is, it is iffy to me a little bit that he's a sort of guard playing center. At least I considered that when he came into the league. And I know he never really stuck as a center in St. Louis. So that is a minor concern for me, but I'm not going to complain if the Falcons wind up adding another center. I'm going to assume that he can snap the ball before I'll give him the benefit of the doubt, I guess.
I mean, that wasn't an issue when I saw him in college, so I'm not too
Yeah,
worried about Derrick Jones snapping the ball.
yeah. I don't recall it being an issue, but I don't get why don't we, my issue is why can't we just go out and get a center, not some sort of versatile guy that can play, a utility player as opposed to just a pure straight up center like we did last year with Gino Gradkowski, but whatever.
Because guys like Gino Gradkowski kind of suck.
Well, I was going to say something snarky about Mike Person and Ben Garland, but yeah, fine, sure.
I mean, at least Person and Garland can block more than those guys can.
Sure. Again, I'll let it go. Evan Burchfield asked, were you surprised by anyone who made the team? Anybody in addition to anybody you said earlier, Scott?
I'm kind of looking at the roster and going through the preseason thoughts that I had, and there's not really one guy that I'm super shocked that made it. I mean, maybe Teron Ward, but he acted like a gladiator that last game with 22 carries on a bum leg. I mean, maybe Tyson Jackson, just because I feel like the Falcons would be better to give those snaps to a younger, more in-need player. I mean, maybe LeRoy Reynolds, just because I felt like maybe they could have kept another corner instead of a seventh linebacker and played Wheeler and Warlow and Weatherspoon on special teams instead of Reynolds. But, I mean, for the most part, I mean, there's not anything that's super out there that's, like, surprising on the roster based on preseason play. Like, I wouldn't have expected Brian Poole to make the roster just kind of looking at the roster in the beginning of the preseason. But after watching him play in the nickel and going back and watching his college film, and basically he just played in the nickel, and I like it. I mean, he's a solid nickel corner for 4 weeks until Jalen Collins comes back.
I'm with you. Yeah, my only surprises were the two tight ends, Perkins and Toilolo. All right, we got another question from Chief Gonzalez 2. He asked, chances O'Brien Scofield finds his way on the Falcons roster?
What's his role? That's my question. Like, when I look at the Falcons roster, I see clear carved out roles for a lot of guys. Vic Beasley plays strong side linebacker and left defensive end in the base, or left defensive end in the nickel. Derrick Shelby, Rashid Hageman, they're going to play, or Derrick Shelby's going to play defensive tackle in the nickel. Upshaw is going to rotate in at defensive tackle. Babin is defensive tackle. Grady Jarrett's a nose tackle. Tyson Jackson is going to rotate at 3 and 5 tech. Hageman's going to rotate at 3 and 5 tech in the base. Claiborne and Reed are going to play defensive end. Freeney's going to play pass rushing end in the nickel. Where is Scofield's role? He's not a good weak side linebacker. He's not a good middle linebacker. And Jones and Campbell just took those spots. So where does Scofield get on the field? So barring injury to Brooks Reed or Claiborne or Freeney, I don't see a need for Scofield right now.
Yeah, I think the chances are low. I think the only real shot he has is basically if someone gets hurt. And those three guys that Scott just mentioned, as well as Vic Beasley. I mean, that was basically what Beasley's role is today is basically what Scofield's role was at the end of the season. And, I all off season we've been talking about this a lot where, I thought he deserved the opportunity to come back. I thought he played pretty well. Also contributes on the special teams as well. So I think if the Falcons hadn't clearly made decisions that clearly they were moving in another direction, I think there would be an opportunity for him still. But with the additions of Freeney, basically with the money they've invested in Brooks Reed, at least for this season, as well as having Claiborne and, Wheeler, I guess, as the backup to Beasley at that strong side spot, there really isn't a clear need for Scofield for now. And, I don't think that's going to change unless the Falcons deal with some injuries further down the road. Okay, I think that's it for that with the roster. So let's talk about the depth chart. Now, the Falcons updated their Week 1 depth chart. Some of the changes were pretty much like they were just getting more accurate than what they had for their unofficial depth charts during the preseason. Like, for example, putting Wes Schweitzer at right guard as opposed to left guard and putting Mike Person at left guard instead of right guard. So, that's not a real change. That's just basically someone, fixed the error from before. We got the official basically announcement that Deion Jones and Devondre Campbell would open the season as the starters. I don't think that was a surprise based off the last couple of preseason games. I know we got a mailbag question from Nick Pasqualoni. He says, what do the rookie linebackers do well at so far and not so well?
I think they play coverage well. And I think that's been one of the biggest questions that we've had of the Falcons linebackers since 2012. Hell, even during 2012. I'd say since Mike Smith came into Atlanta, that's been the biggest question that we've had on Falcons linebackers. Can they cover? And the answer is no. Michael Boley, Demario Williams, they could cover. Once they left, the Falcons had no one who could cover a tight end. They had no one who could cover a running back out of the backfield. And even if, Devondre Campbell is only Michael Boley, that's still a decent linebacker to have at weak side linebacker in this scheme. Even if Deion Jones can only be Demario Williams, that's still at least someone who can cover running backs out of the backfield. That's something that we haven't seen in Atlanta for almost a decade. So I think they cover really well. I think that's going to hold. I think what they do poorly is I don't think they play the run that well. I think they flow to the ball effectively. I think they use their speed effectively to get to the ball. I think they have trouble getting off blocks, and I think they have trouble tackling. Campbell a lot less than Jones, but I think they both have their own issues when it comes to tackling. But I'll take the lapses that they have instinctually against the run for their just intelligence and instincts that they have in coverage. Because they'll learn eventually the run game. I think they will eventually both be very effective against the run. The issue that I'm worried about is can they just stick to what they do well and play those zones effectively? And Deion Jones does well, and I think Campbell does well in zone coverage.
I think it's all fair. I think the book on both of those guys is basically the same as what we thought it was going to be when they came out of college. I think if you're talking about what's the area of weakness for Campbell, I think it's sort of the instincts and the reading and recognizing things. I think it's still a little, maybe half a step slow in terms of reading those things, which I think sort of can occasionally, it's not a massive issue. So let me preface it by saying it's only a minor issue. But what it is because he's half a step slow, he's not attacking the block, he's not attacking the gap as well. So it allows, for example, if there's an offensive lineman trying to make a reach block and trying to climb up to the second level to get in position, it gives that offensive lineman a half second or a full second to get, to basically gear up and get in position to make that block. And so that's why I think where Campbell has a little bit of struggles getting off of those blocks, because it's instances like that where he's just playing a little slow, a little bit more hesitantly, playing on his heels a little bit more than he probably should. I think the coverage thing is where Campbell really is out, man-to-man coverage. We saw that in the preseason. I think that's going to be an asset, getting him one-on-one with tight ends and whatnot. I know Dan Quinn said this offseason that they're going to try to play a lot more man coverage in certain situations. I think they're going to be a little bit more confident and willing to play some man coverage, some cover one, some zero coverage on third and shorts, which, typically last year, anytime they got in third and long, they almost always played zone, and sometimes they did that quite a bit on third and shorts as well. So I think that's what Campbell brings to the table. I think Jones's strength also is coverage. I don't think he's quite the man-to-man cover guy that Campbell is, but I do think he works well in zone, which is fine. And his speed, I think his instincts are a little bit better than I expected them to be, just in terms of his ability to read and recognize plays and sort of react quickly. I've been impressed with that. I think the issue with Jones is going to be tackling. And I think probably in every preseason game, I counted at least one missed tackle. Now, a lot of them were sort of where, he bounced off the guy and slowed him up. And then, immediately right after that, somebody else on the defense made the tackle. So it wasn't like this glaring issue like we saw, I guess it was against the Browns or whatever, on that first snap where he whiffed hard on that tackle. It wasn't anything glaring like that for the most part. But I do feel like kind of in the same way that Sean Weatherspoon dealt with during his career, where there's going to be a lot of times where he misses tackles. Now, I think the eventual goal for Jones is going to be where those negative plays where he misses tackles are going to be outweighed by the positive plays where he does wind up making stops and getting to the ball quickly and showing that range and that speed and that aggressiveness that Weatherspoon also showed in his prime. And when Weatherspoon was at his best, we saw that positive plays way outweighed the negative plays like the missed tackles. And then sometimes, towards the end when we changed schemes under Nolan, it sort of tended to balance out to make it a little bit more neutral or maybe sometimes weigh on the negative side. And at least for Jones, just because I tend to set my expectations a little lower than most people, my expectation is it's going to be more of that early on in this season. But I do hope and expect that as the season wears on, we're going to see those sort of negative and positive plays tend to balance out a little bit more and may wind up seeing a little bit more positive plays than the negative ones. And certainly in future seasons. But I think, at least for this year, I think maybe we should temper our expectations a little bit and not expect him to come in and suddenly be, this dominant interior player. But I do think he can be an effective to good starter.
Yeah. Going back to when you said Devondre Campbell might be a half step slow, at this point, it's still quicker than what we were expecting from him. Because
I think that's fair.
I was honestly expecting Campbell to be easily 3-4 steps behind mentally, like not ready really to see the field this year. And if he's a half step slow, like I'll accept that this year because I know next year he'll be right on speed. Rookies are going to be at least a half step slow. Even Deion Jones is a half step slow, but they've got the speed to make up for it physically.
Yeah. Now, I thought it was interesting, in speaking about the linebackers, that Dan Quinn said that all the linebackers would still play, even though Jones and Campbell would be the starters, which implied that Weatherspoon and Warlow are still going to see reps on defense, as opposed to just being exclusively on special teams. How do you sort of expect that to play out, Scott? How do you think the reps will be divvied up? Are we going to see instances where, a series here or a series there where we'll see Spoon and Warlow out there on the field?
I think it's going to be more Jones or Campbell gets winded, so they put Spoon or Warlow out there. Or it's going to be like, hey, we're at the goal line. We need someone who can get off blocks a little bit better. And they'll throw Warlow and Weatherspoon out there instead of Jones and Campbell and say, hey, get out there, get off blocks. And Wheeler, because Wheeler can get off blocks better too. I think that's going to be more where they're used. It's not going to be – I don't see them playing whole series. I don't see them doing anything crazy. Unless Deion Jones screws up a call tremendously and they sit him out for, 4 or 5 plays because of it, I don't see them doing anything crazy like playing Warlow the whole series. Maybe on like a first down, but that's about it.
Okay. Speaking on the depth chart, another notable change was that Tyson Jackson is moving back to defensive end, where he had been working previously as the base defense 3 technique in the base defense. Presumably he will move back to the strong side defensive end spot in the base defense. Do you feel like this is the move that's going to benefit Tyson Jackson, or is it we're basically Tyson Jackson?
I think Tyson Jackson blows as an interior defensive lineman. I think if you put him at 5 tech, that's the only thing he really does well. So throw him out there at 5 tech. I think have Hageman play 3 tech because Hageman showed he could play it last year. And just rotate the guys. Rotate Hageman and Jackson at 3 and 5. And have Babineau come in and play 3 and 5 as well. Well, play the 3. Have Babineau play the 3 because that's what he does well.
Okay.
And have those 3 guys play those roles in the base.
Okay. I thought Jackson played pretty well this preseason, considering it's Tyson Jackson. So I didn't have any issues with him playing D tackle this year if he continued to play like he did this summer. It feels like this move is less an issue with Tyson Jackson getting him into the best position, but more sort of a indicator of, I don't know, disappointment maybe with what Derrick Shelby is doing. And, you know, he was listed as the backup defensive tackle on the depth chart today. I do wonder a little bit what the team sort of envisions his role being this year, because I don't necessarily see, like, if he's a D tackle, I would see him at best as like the 4th best defensive tackle on the team, regardless of nickel or base. And I do feel like we know what Jackson is as a 5 technique at the D end spot. And I thought Hageman played really well this summer at that same spot. And so I feel like at this point, maybe Shelby's the 3rd best base defensive end. And, you know, I don't want to be too harsh on Derrick Shelby because he'll have plenty of opportunities to sort of, you know, prove it over the course of this year. But based off of this summer, all I can say is I don't see any reason why he should be playing at all, personally. But what are your thoughts on sort of Shelby's move and what is his role going to be this year?
All right, I'm just kind of looking at the defensive lineman right now, and I'm trying to find that role for Shelby too. And I think it'd be in the nickel and in pass rush sets. But honestly, like, he's not someone you want to put in the base because I think Tyson Jackson or Hageman's going to play the 3 and the other one's going to play the 5. So either way, those guys are going to be on the line. Because I agree with you that Hageman was doing well. And I think you've got Grady Jarrett as the 1 technique nose tackle there. And then Brooks Reed rounds out the base defensive line as the Leo. I think in the nickel, you've got Claiborne and you've got you'll see Grady Jarrett there sometimes. You'll see Babineau there. Maybe even Upshaw on the interior. Derrick Shelby, I guess, at times in the nickel. And you'll see Vic Beasley. But where exactly Shelby plays, I don't really know 100%. And then in pure pass rush situations, you'll see Freeney out there. Like, I think their pass rush set will eventually be Freeney, either Babineau or Upshaw, Grady Jarrett, and then Vic Beasley. I think that's going to be their eventual pass rush set.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I look at Shelby and I'm like, I think there's 3 potential outcomes. I think there's one where he plays well and all this talk of him not playing well is long forgotten. That's the ideal scenario outcome. I think the second is that his play doesn't really improve, but he gets playing time just because he's making all that money and the team obviously wants to see that investment work out for them, which is probably the second likeliest scenario. And then there's the third outcome where he just, he doesn't really improve and he doesn't play at all because they have better options. That's probably the least likely scenario, but it is a little concerning for me, at least. You guys know I tend to set expectations really low with Falcon players, with free agents and draft picks, and Shelby has underwhelmed me. And it's when I'm underwhelmed, I think it says a lot. But we'll see what happens with that.
I feel like you're more underwhelmed than I am with those kind of situations. But I agree. He has been underwhelming. He hasn't been what we expected he would be. I'd like to see him against game action just to see if maybe he's just not doing well in the preseason. Maybe he was working on something, who knows? But maybe he just isn't a good fit on the inside. Maybe they just need to keep him at left end in the scheme, at strong side end. I don't know. But
Yep.
I'm with you. He was disappointing, and I see a situation, a possibility where Courtney Upshaw sees those 3 technique times and looks closer to Jonathan Babineau than Derrick Shelby has.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of people brought this up on Twitter, and I sort of agree with them. He does look like he's a little heavier than he was last year. That may be affecting him. That may be why he's not looking as explosive as he did last year in Miami. That's a very likely cause. And we can talk about whether that's the Falcons sort of telling them you're going to play a lot more inside than you did last year. And he decided he was going to bulk up and get up to 280, 285 as opposed to 275. That's a fair thing. I guess for me it's a little questionable, and I'm a little concerned about it because, the idea that, well, maybe he was just taking it easy in preseason. Like, well, if people go back and watch that Miami game against the Falcons last summer, he tore Ryan Schrader a new one. So it's clear that he can play well in the preseason. It's not like this is something that he's used to doing, lollygagging in the summer. So that one I'm a little questionable about. But obviously, again, he's going to have 16 potentially opportunities to sort of show what he can do this year, and hopefully he makes the most of those. And this conversation that we're having right now is something that's long forgotten by the time we get further into the season.
Hopefully.
At Whisper 2000s asks, what are your thoughts on the base defensive line?
I think it's going to be at Leo. I think you get Hageman or Jackson at the 3 tech, Jared at the 1 tech, and then Hageman or Jackson at the other one. Whoever they feel like playing at 3 or 5 at this point, those 2 guys are pretty much interchangeable. It's just where do you want your guys, like where do you want your potential impact player at, and where do you want your consistent, like Jackson is your consistently average defensive lineman, where Hageman is a guy who has the potential to flash for that play or 2 or 3 and somehow make, if he's on that day, somehow make an impact. We saw it against the Saints when he had a sack. I'd like to see him actually play with that kind of ferocity every play. But if he can do it, I think that's going to be a good base defensive line.
Okay. Yeah, I'm pretty confident with the 3, Jackson and Jared at the nose, Reed at the Leo spot. To me, the question is who's going to be that 3 technique. Hageman was it last year, based off of the depth chart, which, how much you can put stock into that. Hageman's still listed as a D end. Babineau could potentially play that 3 technique spot, or Shelby could wind up playing that spot. So I think it's down to one of those 3 playing that spot. Probably I think Babineau would probably give you the best role in that spot, but if the Falcons still feel comfortable or confident with Babineau being a pass rusher more and trying to save him by limiting his run snaps, then you got to choose between Hageman or Shelby. I don't necessarily expect Upshaw to be that guy, at least early in the season. Maybe eventually he'll get there. But we'll have to see how it goes. I think one of the big questions about the base defense going into this season was, were we going to be able to get more pass rush out of it? And that was a big reason why the Falcons went out and got Shelby. It's a big reason why they wound up getting rid of Solia and plugging Jared in that role. I
think with Jared in there, they will.
Yeah, I mean, the hope was, I think the hope was to get 4 better pass rushers at all 4 of those spots. And I think you could probably say that they did so with Jared. The hope, I'll give Brooks Reed the benefit of the doubt and say he'll be an upgrade over Corey Bierman. The question is going to be those other 2 spots. With Jackson still there, clearly that's not a downgrade, but it's a lateral decision. With Shelby there, potentially we had more pass rushing ability there. Now, if Babineau winds up playing that 3 technique spot, then I think that'll give us a lot more pass rush there. So we'll see how it plays out. But I think we've said this a bunch of times. I think our defensive line rotation, whether it's the nickel or the base defense, is a work in progress. And what we come out with week 1 is not necessarily where we're going to be settling at week 17. Okay, we talked a little bit about the kickoff and punt returner with Coleman and Weems expected to do that week 1. And we talked a little bit about Gabriel taking over at some point. But Evan Birchfield asked the question, what are your thoughts on Tevin Coleman being the primary kick returner?
I think it puts an explosive element back there, and maybe he a touchdown, once this year, or maybe he just randomly. Sometimes that explosive element isn't a touchdown. Maybe it's he has 4 or 5 returns where he's getting to the 40, 45-yard line throughout the season, and those come at key times. Say Coleman. Say the Falcons are down in that 3rd game against the Saints, 21-17. Saints just scored to go ahead, 5 minutes left in the 4th quarter. He brings it out to the 45. That's a spark that you need on offense, and Coleman provides that. And sometimes that spark is all you need to get everything else going.
That's fair. This is interesting to me because I don't think Coleman actually returned a single kickoff during the preseason. I know he was back there for that first game, but I think he sort of took a knee. So he's sort of an unknown commodity there. I did read an article last week and I linked to it on my takeaways column on FalcFans.com this week, where someone basically estimated that only 23% of kickoffs will be returned this year because of the new guidelines. Last year, that number was about 40%. So I do feel like whoever the Falcons kickoff returner is, it really doesn't matter because we will rarely see kickoffs. Like basically based off of that 23% number, that basically means there's only going to be about, on average, 20 kickoff returns this year. So that's a little more than 1 a game. So I don't feel like whoever that guy is, whether it's Coleman, McKissick, or Gabriel or whoever, is really going to matter all that much because, the numbers sort of suggest that the chances of, I think only about 30 to 35% of kickoff returns last year got more than 25 yards. So it is one of those things. Those might have been 30 to 35% of the ones that got returned, not necessarily all. So it is one of those things where statistically, if you're into analytics, if you're a special teams coordinator, unless you have Cordero Patterson, who I think returned about 50% of his kickoffs for more than 25 yards, you just might as well just take the touchback. Even if you're 2 yards deep, just take the touchback, get the free 25 yards, and go from there because the chances of your guy getting past that 25-yard line is probably, very much lower than it is just taking it. So I think this will be an interesting thing to see how it plays out with Coleman, particularly with Keith Armstrong. I do feel like the sort of who the kickoff returner is really doesn't matter just because of these sort of numbers I just spouted at you, but we'll see how it plays out. Yeah.
Well, it'll also be interesting when you see when we go back and look at what Tevin Coleman did as a kick returner back when he was in college as a freshman. He was returning him 20, 25 yard or 20, 23 yards a pop in that range. And he had one brought back for a touchdown.
Mm-hmm.
And this was right around the same time they were thinking about that 25-yard rule. But teams were popping them shorter. So maybe that's what goes on with Tevin Coleman this year is teams pop him shorter than the end zone. He picks it up at the 3. You bring it back 23 yards after picking it up at the 3. That's at the 26. It's still better than where it was. So I think it'll all depend early on. I think he'll get more. I think he'll get more opportunities early on than he will later on in the season.
Yeah, we'll see. As I said before, my expectations are low. I'm not expecting kickoff returns to be a big component of the Falcons, season this year. So we'll see what happens. All right, let's move on to the big thing that we need to talk about. That is that the Falcons have an actual game this Sunday. They get to play the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in the Georgia Dome. The Falcons are 8-0 in home openers under Matt Ryan. So hopefully that streak will continue to 9-0. It would be very upsetting to see the Falcons start the season off on a bad foot, especially given how tough our schedule is with I think this is, I don't want to say this is a must win because that's sort of crazy to say about a week 1 game, but given the toughness of the schedule, this is going to be one of the more winnable games early in the season, I think. So winning this game will be, I think, important for playoff implications later down the road. But let's talk a little bit about the injuries before we get into some of the matchups that we're looking forward to. Julio Jones and Teron Ward did miss Monday's practice, both with ankle injuries, but they are expected to be full go on Wednesday, so that's a positive sign. So I don't think we have to worry about those guys' availability. And some of the other guys that were dealing with injuries late in the preseason, like Claiborne and Freeney and Kamal Ishmael, were all healthy for Monday's practice, and they should be ready to go. So it doesn't seem like, other than Keanu Neal, there doesn't seem to be any major injuries that the Falcons are going to be dealing with going into this week. And on the Bucs side, I know Ali Marpet, the right guard, and Darryl Smith, the strong side linebacker for the Bucs, they both missed some time in the preseason with ankle and an undisclosed injury for Smith, but I think they both practice on Monday, so they're probably going to be going. So other than J.R. Sweezy and maybe the other guy that they put on a PUP, I think the Bucs are pretty healthy as well, which is to be expected this early in the season. So both teams are pretty much at full strength, at least 98% full strength. So I don't think injury is going to play a lot into this. But that doesn't mean some of these matchups won't be critical. Scott, what are some of the matchups that you're looking forward to seeing, and where do you think some of these matchups where the Falcons can take advantage and vice versa?
I really want to see how this interior line holds up against the tackles that they have. And I want to see how the Falcons pass rush handles or goes against their interior OL or their offensive line.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah, I think this is a game that's going to really boil down to which team wins in the trenches. I think last year with the Bucs, it was a little disappointing to see some of our pass rush not be as effective against a pretty green offensive line with a rookie left tackle and Donovan Smith, a rookie right guard, and Ali Marpet, Gosler Cherilus at right tackle, Joe Hawley, who we adore to a certain extent, but was basically playing on a bad knee last year. And to see some of those games where we were really struggling to get pressure on Jameis Winston was a little disappointing. So hopefully that changes this year. Hopefully Beasley will take that step with Freeney going up against Donovan Smith. That'll be a difference maker. With Sweezy being out, that means Kevin Pamphile, I don't know how to say his name.
Pamphile.
He'll be playing left guard, and that's going to be whoever that 3 technique in the base defense. That's who he'll be going up against, as well as probably, we'll find out who's the nickel right tackle. But it'll probably be Babineau, Jared, or maybe even Claiborne or Shelby. So that'll be something to keep an eye on, and hopefully the Falcons can sort of take advantage of those matchups. I'm with you on that. You mentioned the Bucs D-line against our interior offensive line. Yeah, I think the one matchup, the scariest matchup for this game, if you're looking at the Bucs team, it's obviously Gerald McCoy. He's arguably the best player. He did work over Chris Chester a couple of years ago. And I'm not that optimistic that that's going to change suddenly just because Alex Mack is lined up beside Chris Chester, but he should help him out a little bit more. And you might see the Falcons, instead of doing what they usually do, which is slide their protections to the left, they might slide them to the right to give Chester a little bit more help. So that is an interesting matchup.
I think Mac's going to be like, where's 97 and where is this middle linebacker? And he'll call the protections based on that. Like 97's here, middle linebacker's there. That's how we're going to set the protection. Like, make sure you know where he's at. And as long as you know where he's at, you're good.
Yeah. The Falcons offensive line, continue on the line of thinking with the trench play. I'll be curious to see how the Bucs pass rush, how we can handle that. I know they're going to have a lot of speed out there. They're going to have Noah Spence and Jacquees Smith out there on the edges. They'll probably kick Ayers inside, obviously with McCoy beside him. So that's a lot of speed because Ayers, is a 270-pound Michael Bennett type, a poor man's Michael Bennett. And I know Smith had like 4 sacks this preseason, and he typically has a decent game against the Falcons, if my recollection. So I do feel like this is a game, if the Falcons are going to win it, it's going to be because they can control the line of scrimmage better than they have in the past. I don't think the Bucs are that unfavorable a matchup that it's not possible that they can't do it. So I do feel like this is a favorable matchup for the Falcons. And if we see this as a game where they struggle with the Bucs D-line, then it does make me a little reprehensive about, because this is not nearly the best defensive line that we're going to see all year. So I hope they can pass this test. One of the other areas not dealing with the line that I do feel like the Falcons should be able to take advantage of is with their wide receivers against their corners. I know Hargreaves is going to be their nickel guy, so he'll be matched up with Sanu. Hargreaves is a smaller guy, very talented corner, so he may wind up locking up Sanu, but I do feel like Sanu does have that size advantage, so he should be able to win a couple of those. Grimes is the left corner, so that probably means he'll see a lot more Justin Hardy when we go to 3 wide than Julio Jones. And, so I'm not really expecting Hardy to, tear Brent Grimes a new one. It's going to really be that Julio versus Alteron Werner matchup. We've seen that in the past where Julio has really made Werner, look bad in past years. That 2014 game in week 3 immediately jumps to mind. So I feel like that's a situation that the Falcons can really take advantage of and sort of get things going offensively. Scott, were there any other matchups that you were looking forward to seeing?
I really just am looking forward to see this Falcons team against a decent running game and really see how they handle it, because let's not act like Doug Martin's a bad running back, And I want to see how they handle Dirk Cutter's offense this year after seeing it, 2 years in a row. And they should know the offense, basically. They should know how these guys are handling it. Sean Weatherspoon's seen it firsthand. Ryan's seen it firsthand. They should know how to attack this offense with the defense. But they finally have players that have the speed that Dan Quinn wants on defense.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's gonna a lot of it's gonna be a lot of Doug Martin, and he was very effective against the Falcons defense last year. Hopefully that will change with the added speed at linebacker with some of the changes we've made in the middle of the D-line. So I think the keys for both teams are going to be stopping the run first, because both teams are very heavily run-based offenses. Obviously, the Bucs are that way because Jameis Winston is still a developing quarterback, and the Falcons are that way because that's Kyle Shanahan's offense. So, this will be a big test. This is going to be 2 teams that are going to want to try to out-physical each other, and we'll find out on Sunday which team is the more physical of the 2. Now, we got a couple of mailbag questions pertaining to this Bucs matchup, and Joshua Hammond asks, will Atlanta's defense stop Jameis Winston for running for 100 yards?
This year? Yes. Since they have linebackers who actually want to go and tackle somebody, I think this year they do. We're not going to see Justin Durant pop off of Jameis Winston 3 times on the same play. I think we're going to see Vic Beasley actually tackle him this time in the backfield. Yeah, I'm predicting a Vic Beasley sack this week, guys. I know it sounds crazy, but I'm predicting it.
Okay. Yeah, you're way out there, Scott. Predicting Vic Beasley to sack the quarterback. That's crazy.
Yeah, Vic Beasley's going to do his job this week and get a quarterback sack.
Yeah.
And I think Grady Jarrett has a shot at one too.
Fair enough. Yeah, I hope we can stop Jameis from running for 100 yards. I mean, I hope we can stop him from running for 10 yards. It's not like if he's that fast, what has he got, like 5.0 40 speed? Like, please, can we catch up to Jameis Winston? Please. I hope we don't see what we saw last year on that 3rd and 19 or whatever it was. I think this might be the last mailbag.
About his 40? Matt Ryan ran a faster 40 than Jameis Winston did.
There you go, guys. Okay. So I think this is our last mailbag question. I'm just checking Twitter to make sure I didn't miss one. And if I did, I apologize. But Evan Birchfield asked for us a score prediction for week 1. Scott, I can go first if you need a couple of seconds to think about it.
Yeah, go for it.
I'm going to go with 24-23. I think it's going to be a very close game. I think we're going to see a couple of Roberto Aguayo field goals. I think he'll probably miss one, maybe even a clutch one at the end of the game. I don't think this is going to be a high-scoring game just because I think both teams' game plans are going to be centered around the running the football and then sort of building off of that, which I think – doesn't lead itself to the Falcons putting up a ton of points. So 24-23, I think it's going to be close. I think it's going to go down to the wire. It's going to be a lot of back and forth, as we saw last year with some of those games. And I think the Falcons will wind up prevailing in the end.
I'm going to predict the Falcons win, and I'm going to go 28-21. I just think that they're going to have a better – I think they're going to have a better defense, and I think the offense might actually have a game plan this week that people aren't expecting. Run the ball in the red zone kind of game plan. I feel like all preseason, all they did in the red zone was pass. I don't think they ran once all preseason in the red zone. Outside of that, like Tevin Coleman run that he almost got in. So I think we're going to see a lot more running in the red zone. We're going to see a lot more touchdowns scored from Devontae Freeman and maybe even Tevin Coleman this game in the red zone than what we'll see from Matt Ryan.
There you go. All right, guys, we will be back to talk about this game next Tuesday. Hopefully it's a win. I will try to keep up the tradition of I'll rock the Matt Ryan jersey if the Falcons win. Haven't gotten a chance to really wear that jersey a lot as much as I want to the last couple of seasons. So if you guys want to get your mailbag questions in, you can use the hashtag Falcons Mailbag. You can tweet at the show at Falcons PFC. My Twitter handle is at FalcFans. Scott is at Karasik S. I think, yeah, that's it for the mailbag questions. If you want to rate us and review us, subscribe to us on iTunes, you can do that there. You can find us on Stitcher as well. You can go to ProFootballCentral.com, find other great team-related podcasts as well as our archives over there. Yeah, I think that's it. I'm blanking on what the usual spiel is, but I think I hit all the. We'll be back next week to talk Falcons Bucs as well as my second favorite team, the Oakland Raiders. So.
Right.